is it okay to kind of put everything else in your life on the back burner when you're growing your business? And absolutely. It's just about being assertive, being really communicative with the people in your life who you love and who you have commitments to. Like for me, in my day-to-day life, it's my husband, who's very, very, very supportive. So it helps, but it also means I have to, be really open with him about what my availability is going to be.
This is Therapist Clubhouse, a podcast for private practice entrepreneurs. I'm Annie Schusler. This week, I'm talking to Kerrie Mohr, a private practice entrepreneur in the financial district in New York City. Listen as we talk about how she expanded her solo private practice into a group practice and how she's made decisions about hiring, boundaries, fees, and more. So welcome, Kerrie. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to talk to you about your entrepreneurial journey. You have a group practice. So can you tell us how long you've been in private practice and then how long you've had a group practice?
Sure. I started my group practice about a year ago. It was March of 2017 when I hired Heather, who is a senior associate on the team. And Heather and I worked together for a nonprofit organization called Good Shepherd Services. She was a senior social worker on the team there. So she was a very natural first hire for me. I knew her work very well.
And what told you that it was time to start a group practice?
I kind of paid attention to signs, and I'm not a very woo-woo person, but I do have to say that it came to me through a couple signs and I followed them. So I started my group practice in the summer of 2015, and I started my individual psychotherapy practice, just me, myself, in the summer of 2015. And I felt very content to do just that. I was really excited about building out a mission in a brand that focused on organizational consultation as well as psychotherapy. My idea at the time was that I really wanted to bring the parts of what I loved about nonprofit leadership into private practice, and then continue to do that work with organizations, nonprofit agencies, corporations, and with schools. And that by doing that, along with doing individual therapy, I could really, work in parallel process and really make sure that the way that I practiced in the therapy room was aligned with the way that I promoted leadership in democracy and in workplaces. It was very difficult to build those out at the same time. It was a lot of work. And then what ended up happening was I grew my private practice a lot more quickly than the consulting was going. I had a lot of irons in the fire, and then I started working with one school on a social emotional learning curriculum and helping the teachers and the leadership team learn how to implement a program in their school. But that was really the only organizational work I ended up doing and working with that school for a while. But even with that school, I started working with a family and with a child in the school one-on-one. And that just kind of kept on coming back to that as the need. So I followed it. And once I just kind of set the vision on mostly the psychotherapy practice and then scaled it, I felt very certain that was the right thing to focus on. So as I continued to scale that and then started hiring staff, it's continued to be the case. Although I do, have a goal to be able to further down the road, get back into more of the organizational work.
Okay, that's interesting. There's been a theme coming up lately that I feel like this fits really well into, of how you have done kind of a combination of planning, but then also being willing to be flexible. So being willing to follow the data and follow what need is actually being called out for, so that you've got that nice combination of having a vision, planning, and responding and changing your plans.
Yes, I think that flexibility is required of anybody who's really going off on their own and starting their own business. I think it's really important not to be married to, very specific goals, or to have a very, I think it's good to have a clear vision of what you want to achieve, but also to have flexibility is just as important, because, you have to kind of pay attention to what the need is. It's one thing I learned when I was in a nonprofit leadership program at Columbia Business School is that strategy, comes from diagnosis. So you can't just run ahead with strategy without knowing or understanding really what the need is, and knowing, where you fit into that and what it is that you can bring to that situation. And so I really felt I needed to pay attention to that, and what was the calling and what was the need, and respond to it. So yeah, I was adaptable.
And so, as you brought people on, how did you hold on to or co create a vision as a group? How did that shift?
For me, what I did was I wanted to be very intentional about who I could hire that could really fit with the ethos and the mission of a good place therapy. For me, it was to have an orientation of, the solutions focused cognitive behavioral kind of practice, to be really dynamic and present in the room with the client, and that that the client could come to us with very specific goals and an idea of what it is that they really are unhappy with and what they want to change, and that they could really rely on us as partners in a part of that change process. And so it was just important for me, for people I hired, to really kind of reflect that. And when I was hiring Heather, and then the second hire being Michael, that was easy because I'd worked with both of them in previous organizations. So I felt like I had a really good sense of their clinical sensibility and the work that they had done. So really, it was as W-2 employees of the organization. Another thing I really wanted to make certain of that it was really hiring in accordance with the fair labor practices, and that what I was asking of them was right, and that could serve them as much as it would serve me or the practice. I could really expect them to work in accordance with the mission.
Yeah. And so that's a choice point of hiring folks as W-2 employees rather than as contractors. And was that clear to you? How did you know that you wanted to go ahead and hire employees?
It was clear to me just through having just a few conversations with a few individuals, including the billing company that I work with, and also just doing a lot of reading on New York State labor law. I'm from Minnesota originally, but professionally I've worked in New York and in California mostly, and both of these states have very strict labor laws, and for a reason I support. And I think when I look at, again, my life and my practice and my career, business kind of all being in alignment and in sync, then that means that I pay attention to what's good for people, what's good for the community when I make decisions like that. And I felt, well, okay, yes, I'm going to be paying the payroll tax, and then there's other expenses that are associated with that, like the malpractice insurance, unemployment insurance, disability. In New York State, we have paid sick leave that's required for W-2 employees, paid family leave. Mm-hmm. So those all add up to be, pretty high expenses for the practice. But for me, it's totally worth it to be able to offer those things as benefits.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that you've learned about running a team as you've expanded? Because now you've got how many people at this point?
I have 6, and I have a 7th who's starting next week.
Wow. So yes, how has this shifted, and what have you learned over this time about running a team?
I would say that in the beginning, well, I wanted to trust my instincts and what I've focused on in my own growth as a manager of people, and as a leader in all my previous places of work. And so I really made sure that when I was making this leap into private practice, that wasn't going to be lost, that I was able to carry that with me. So naturally I bring that, and that includes a big focus on democracy and decision making where that can happen. Also just the value of emotional intelligence, the knowledge of compassion fatigue, which is really big in our field, and really knowing and understanding, working from a framework that people who care for others need to be cared for, and that is pretty critical. Also, the concept of parallel process, being that we tend to systems tend to be reflections of each other, so that we don't operate in vacuums, that what happens in the therapy room and the way that we're impacted by that can carry into our personal relationships and into our team relationships, and in the relationship between the employee and the boss. And we need to be very mindful of those boundaries, and to be mindful that we want to really practice and to live and to work in a really integrated way, that we want to be mindful of our values, of human integrity and human rights in the workplace, and that we what we value and want for our clients, we want for our employees, and we want for our team and for ourselves.
Yeah, what are some ways that you're able to kind of put that value into the system in your team? Meetings that you have or boundaries that you encourage. I'm curious how it kind of comes into practice.
I encourage open communication and transparency, and I try to show that in my leadership. Mm-hmm. So as far as actual, concrete systems and things that we do and things that we put into place, I would say the thing most recently that comes to mind is the moving into a different space. So the actual importance of the physical space and how that brings us together and allows for cohesiveness and collaboration. That has been a goal of mine for the past year, and I finally was able to just make it happen when I signed this new lease, new master lease, in a new location in the financial district at the edge of Tribeca. And before we did that, it felt a little bit lonely and harder for us to feel like a real team.
Because you were in separate locations?
In the same location, but sharing two offices.
I see. Okay.
So there's only two of us that were working with clients at any given time.
Yeah.
And we're just kind of passing each other by like ships in the night.
So tell me a little bit about, take us behind the curtain of what is it like for you running a group practice, also being a clinician, so running the group practice in terms of you're managing people and you're nurturing people, and then you're also a clinician, but then you're also the CEO, where you're running the company. How in the heck are you balancing all of that? How's that work for you?
It's pretty tough.
Yeah.
I have difficulty putting limits on my own caseload, for one, just because I was so happy, and I felt like going into private practice, even just as a solo practitioner, was such a transformative change in my life, and something I felt this tremendous privilege to be able to do. And I want to keep doing it. There's not anything about making this decision to go into private practice that's more important than serving the individual, client. So that said, you do need to take a step back from that one-to-one work when you have to support the needs of a team, and you have to really make sure that you're making progress in accordance with what your vision is, and that you are actually available for support when people need it, because things come up and happen, and if you're back-to-back clients all day long, then you're obviously not going to be able to be of support to people. So it's been hard for me to kind of balance that at different times in my practice. When I was contemplating growth, I would do things like stop taking new intakes for a month, why I felt like I could hammer out policies and procedures and get things in place. And then this time, even though I had to orchestrate this, actually it was a big gut renovation of a new space and build out and decoration and furnishing of the whole space. Even though I had all this going on, I didn't stop taking new clients when need be. And I have at any given week between 22 and 26 clients. So
I just want to interrupt you there and say that is a lot. That's a ton that's a full-time private practice. That's a ton for also doing everything you're doing.
Well, you're
like, I know.
I know. I'm not, I don't, I don't know why I'm doing it. No, the reason why I'm doing it is because like, it's not just because I value that one-on-one time and I want to stay true to that. It's also because I need the money, and
Uh-huh.
the growth has been, taking on this new lease in Manhattan. Of course, it's like the super expensive real estate, and I want to have all the resources and support to really execute on our vision of the practice. So that means I need to pay for it. I did take out a loan for my husband, just a really small loan when I had to sign the lease, because again, a commercial lease in New York is no easy thing to kind of take on. So for the security deposit, I needed that support, but everything else I've just been able to put down the funds and pay for it on the Amex, which has to be paid off. So I feel I've, taken great pride in just working my butt off so I could make those payments and I could pay for the growth as needed. So maybe I've been a little bit stubborn when it comes to just kind of getting that done. But I know I'll feel, really glad for it in a few months when I don't have the looming kind of loan hanging over my head.
Yeah. And you're running a business that you can afford. Like, that's so powerful.
Yeah. So it's good to be able to say that this is, that this growth makes sense, that and it's not,
Mm-hmm.
Growth for the sake of growth, that, again, that things being kind of aligned and kind of making sense and happening as much as they can happen really organically is important to me.
Yeah.
So what I have been doing to set some limits is just not taking new clients unless the clients are coming in at the full fee. So that is something I felt more confident than ever to be able to do. It's been really, really difficult. And in addition to that, not taking clients at really bad hours for myself. That
Good.
and I have to admit, it's still a really difficult boundary, that if I'm working with somebody and their schedule changes, and then before you know it, it's an 8 p.m. appointment when I have a 7:30 a.m. the next day, I likely won't say no. I mean, I will, most likely just accommodate them because I want to continue our work together, and I'll just tell myself it's not permanent. So I have mantras that will help me through what's difficult, in addition to setting limits and saying no where I can, which I think is really important, in which I would really support any of my staff or therapy clients to be able to do. Is also saying, well, when does it really make sense for you? Is it okay to kind of put everything else in your life on the back burner when you're growing your business? And absolutely, it's just about being assertive, being really communicative with the people in your life who you love and who you have commitments to. Like for me, in my day-to-day life, it's my husband, who's very, very, very supportive. So it helps, but it also means I have to, be very, really open with him about what my availability is going to be.
I think that's such a good point. When we're really expanding one part of our life and putting so much energy into it, then inevitably, like, the other parts have to contract temporarily. And I think having people in your life who understand that and who can support you and kind of have the long vision with you of knowing that this is sort of a season of sacrifice, but that you're going to be back, that's so helpful.
Yeah. Thank you. I like that a lot. The season of sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. It kind of reminds you it's not permanent.
Yeah. I'm going to think of it that way.
I think from looking at your website that it looked like you're the person who the inquiries come to in the first place, and then you refer to your staff. Is that right? Or how do you do it?
I contract with a billing company and they handle all the scheduling.
Oh, thank God. That seems really helpful.
The email inquiries come in through a group email alias. That's just me and the account manager, so that I can actually kind of pay attention to what's coming through. But the phone calls all just go to that intake line, and they handle that. So they enter everything onto a spreadsheet that I also have access to. And on the spreadsheet, they have the name, the insurance information, the reason for the call. If they've called for and asked for a specific therapist, we'll include that, as well as the referral source. And then we'll change it to green when they go forward with the consultation, red if they say no, fees too high, or whatever the reason is, and then just kind of leave it blank if there's no outcome on it yet. And then the scheduler will do one additional follow-up, either email or phone call, depending on how the client got in touch. And then if they don't reply back, then we just, leave it at that. They work Monday through Friday, so it's pretty traditional. We don't have online scheduling availability. That's kind of like a, cost benefit analysis that you have to do, because I think the temptation is to say, I want people to directly schedule and to make sure I'm getting all those Friday night calls, and that they're scheduling with me for Monday morning. But there's a lot of drawbacks to that. Just one being that they might not be the right fit for your practice. Two being the fee conversation. So I think having them answer the phones and reply to the emails Monday through Friday, and just at the risk of losing people who might not convert is okay with me, as the owner of the practice. There's fewer times where the client is trying to, really barter the fee, or a client saying that they can't come consistently weekly because all those conversations are had up front and the expectations are set.
And so you're saying then so they're scheduling a consultation call rather than the first meeting in the office. Do people speak with the therapist before they come in?
Yeah, but I think this is probably something that is a little bit traditional about my practice. And I would be curious to know even how many practices do the consultation call versus ones that don't. But since I opened up my practice, I've offered a 15-minute free consultation myself. And I think that's I think it's a really nice offering to be able to ensure that there's a good mutual fit between the potential client and the therapist. And, there have been occasions where it hasn't been a good fit. And then the account manager has been able to say to that client, would you like to meet with so-and-so on the team? They also have availability on Tuesday night at 6 p.m. And then, the client would be able to have that call with another therapist if it didn't work out.
I mean, in my experience of working with therapists, it's really important. And I used to run a therapy center. Now I'm just, solo when I'm a therapist. But what I found was that if people scheduled their appointment without having done a phone call, then there was a much higher no-show rate, that it was just so much more likely to not be a fit. So that even in my practice, when people would schedule their first appointment without having talked to someone, we would follow up and make sure that the therapist got to talk to them before that appointment. So I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think it's a big investment in that first meeting.
Yes.
And that's also because I do want the therapist to feel good about the fit too. And about if the client mentioned something that they feel comfortable saying in the consult call, which they didn't tell the account manager, then I want that therapist to be able to save that client some time if they don't feel that they're an expert in that they can really recommend something different, somebody who will be a better fit. So I do kind of stick to that process.
And what's the range of fees? Does everybody charge the same fees in your practice, or are people charging different amounts?
So we all charge, we consider the full rate to be $250, and that's across the board. And then when we determine what the rates are that we can reduce them to, we'll consider a couple different factors. One is whether or not the therapist is a full license at an LCSW or working towards the full license at LMSW, and also what availability they might have in their caseload. So we will go down to, and then there's another factor that we use to determine whether or not we reduce the fee, and that's also what they might have to meet a deductible for out of network. So if there's a very low deductible, then we're less likely to offer a reduced fee across the board, because once they meet their deductible and they're just paying their coinsurance and they know what that coinsurance is and they can expect to pay it, then that's an agreement and something the client is saying that they know that they're capable of being able to pay, and we move forward. In the event that there's a very high deductible, or the client doesn't have a good or any out-of-network plan whatsoever, well, for the LCSWs, we keep consistent at the full rate. We'll go down when they're filling, like recently with Alicia, who's a new LCSW hire, started at $160 for the reduced rate. And then Heather, she's always billing at the full rate as a senior associate. And then for the LMSWs, the brand new hires, we might start at $120. We might offer $125 if the client indicates financial need, or they say the rate that they're given considering the factors is going to be too high for them to consistently, commit to weekly appointments, which we expect in the very beginning, that we'll consider that the reduced rate to be 125 at the lowest.
I know that you run a chapter of Sidewalk Talk with all of your free time. So can you tell us a little bit? Tracy Rubel has been on the show before, but for people who didn't hear that episode, like, what is Sidewalk Talk, and how does it fit in for you?
Well, Sidewalk Talk was something that I was really attracted to when I first learned about it on social media. My friend Mary Ellen, who you interviewed recently,
Yeah.
she was the one who told me about it. I think she was volunteering for it, and I saw pictures and I said, "What is that? That looks amazing, and I want to do that in New York." And for me, what was behind my interest and just enthusiasm for it, and just wanting to sign up immediately and go put a chair out on the sidewalk and volunteer, was just how disconnected I feel like I've become personally in my life because of the state of affairs politically. Just really feeling the division in the country and in my personal life, having it affect a couple of my really important relationships. And I really liked the idea of putting like this practice in place where I'm just allowing myself to be human to human with some stranger, and to be able to offer, listening and an opportunity to connect, and just being curious about what it is I could learn about that process, about somebody else who's sitting across from me, and just about myself in that. And when I had reached out and said, I want to volunteer, I had learned that they didn't have a chapter in New York, which I was really surprised to learn about. Then Mary Ellen had put me in touch with Tracy, and then Tracy said, would you be interested in being a chapter leader? And so I said, well, if that's what I have to do to bring it, I guess I'll do that. So, so I kind of, it came up like that, kind of off the cuff, and I did volunteer to do it. And then I looked into the commitment and requirements, and I thought, oh boy, this is a really big undertaking. But then I really quickly learned what an amazing community it was to be a part of. And I really feel like it's hard to say it without crying. Like it's been so powerful to be connected with this global group of people who are out there, just like literally making the world a better place by increasing connection and promoting the value of empathy and the value of compassion. And I think that through what we do, it gives us this voice and this platform to talk about how do we do that, and help empower people to see ways that they can be more present in their personal relationships, and that they can be more present with strangers. And in New York in particular, there's a lot of things that come up even in the therapy room about interactions with strangers, because we're on the street walking, and we're on the subway in crowded spaces, and people are, very quick to get into each other's personal space and to consider it to be this, affront, or to take it personally and have it really negatively affect them in all sorts of ways. And so to say, well, why don't you come, sit down and volunteer by listening to random strangers who sit down and have a story to tell you, and be challenged to think about that person when they run their baby stroller over your foot at the restaurant or something like that. You're not going to have the same opinion about them. You're not going to have the same rash judgment, or be so critical, because you're going to see them as a human being, and somebody who didn't intentionally try to run your foot over with the stroller, or whatever the small grievance is. So I think there's so many little ways that we have as opportunities for connection, and we miss them constantly because we're in a rush and we're hurrying to get from one place to the next, or we're focused on bigger things, when really what we need to do is to kind of tune in a little bit to ourselves and tune in to each other, and to really see each other. And Sidewalk Talk kind of takes that concept from being really esoteric to being really practical.
So it really starts to change your filter that you see everything through, day to day, moment to moment.
It really does. And for me, it's surprising, because I spent my whole career in nonprofit social service settings. And so I feel like I do have a deep understanding of, just humanity in some ways, and in the most, working with the most vulnerable populations. And And then being a psychotherapist, obviously, I do intimately know people who are sitting across from me on the couch and can really see them. But there's something about the practice of sidewalk talk where you're doing it so out in the open that really, fosters that understanding and that need for connection so much more. And it's just as like powerful and helpful for the person who's that volunteer listener, and for me as it is for like what you hope it is for the person who's sitting across from you.
When you think about you back in I think you said 2015 when you started your private practice, what advice would you have for the Kerrie of that time about to start private practice?
I would say I would maybe just have her trust herself and kind of trust her knowledge and the skills and the talent that she had as a psychotherapist, and to know that with time that the practice will build and the clients will come and stay because of that. So I think that so much comes from just that place of trust that you have in yourself, and that is the energy that you need to bring to it, to really cultivate that safe space for other people. So I think that's what I would really do, is just without even seeing or knowing what it is today, to be able to have that faith in myself and that trust is what I would say.
Nice. And I know, like, before we started recording, you were saying that having a mindset of, not being concerned about comparison, being really grounded in that there's enough, that was really helpful to you.
It's very helpful to me, because I think it's very easy, especially when you're getting started out, to be distracted by all the shiny objects and to think there's always something wrong or with what you're doing or something else you should be doing. Mm-hmm. When what you really need to do is to kind of tune in to yourself and to be really focused on the things that you're doing well. That is really important, is just to kind of stay focused on what you know is right for you.
Excellent. What is the best place that people can find you, that therapists can find you and throw compliments at you?
The best place for therapists to find me, they can reach out on the website. They can fill out the contact form and just say that they heard me on your podcast, and I will definitely write back to them right away. They can also email me at Kerrie, Kerrie, at agoodplacetherapy.com, or they could just give me a call, and all those numbers are also on the website.
Awesome. So it's agoodplacetherapy.com.
Correct.
Thank you so much, Kerrie. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you and hear your story.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to be on.
If you're ready to turn your business into something profitable and unique, head over to coachingwithannie.com and click on Work With Us. I will see you next week.